Make that small.
We probably do.
Just make it small. And you need to see your thing.
I'd like to be able to see it, but
Is it,
it's not really cooperating in that regard.
Is it on?
Well, we should be able to go to settings.
Is it in Google or is it in? Oh, no, it's there.
Settings, display. No, go up to the settings.
Oh, you're gotcha.
See level 1 and 2, that's what we need.
Keep changing. Because then you just open up the edge. I guess it's down at the edge. There we go.
How about that?
How about that? Oh, that.
Okay.
We managed to make it happen.
That's not good at all.
That's probably better. There we go. It worked that time. Weird.
Okay. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm Steve Giles, and I'm going to have a. Okay.
Do you want the thing now? There.
Okay. So I have a topic that I hope you'll find topical. We have an election coming up on Tuesday, and I'm hoping that everybody has been able to mail or use the drop boxes for your ballots already, because we've heard that the post office might not be postmarking your ballots if you drop them off like tomorrow or Tuesday. They might not postmark them until Wednesday. And so I would urge you to take them to a drop box. I'm an election observer, and so we actually go out and watch the drop boxes. So they're very safe, and you can be assured that your vote will count if indeed you can get them to the drop boxes before 8 o'clock on Tuesday evening. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. And I think our topic today will perhaps encourage you to do so. And this is a difficult topic. I don't want to pretend that this is something that's fun as much as it is necessary in order to get a sense of what's going on in our broader society and be able to think about it in really 3 levels. So what are the implications at the national level of the rise of Christian nationalism? What about at the community level? And then what about our relationship with it here at Agnus Dei? And so as I'm going through these materials, which are data heavy, a lot of numbers, I'll ask you to bear that in mind, and I would hope to entertain your questions about that, and to the degree that we can find an understanding, I think it's to our advantage both as individuals and as a community to get a better understanding of what's going on. So as I said, there are going to be a lot of statistics. I apologize if some of it is going to be dense, but these are important topics. And from my point of view, as a professional, I deal with data. And so I think that one way for us to come to grips with what's going on is through the data. So to the degree that we can look at the data and understand those implications and then project that into our own lives is a way that we can gain a mastery of what's going on and then feel that we're not the victims of what's happening, but rather active participants in our democracy. And we can challenge some of the things that are happening. So I'm also going to take a position of speaking to the data. I'm not going to try to infuse my own opinions, philosophy, perspectives on the data, but I would ask you to bring your own understanding and ask your questions based upon that, that understanding as you engage with the data. So what I've done is take two reports that have come out from the Pew Foundation. They have what's called the Public Religion Research Institute. This is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to research looking at religion, values, and public life. And they have been around for a long time, over 30 years. They annually conduct a whole series of studies, and I'm going to be talking about two of them here. The first is the 2024 American Values Study. And this was an interview process of 22,000 people in all 50 states. The results you'll see are weighted by the state populations and cross-checked against issues like age, cohort, level of education, income, and all those types of characteristics to make sure that we have a set of study results that are indicative of the broader population. So 542 participants were from Washington State. So this particular study has been conducted since 2006. They do it on a biannual basis. They'll publish the results, but they gather data every 6 months, so you can see longitudinal views of how the data demonstrates the changes in society over time. Beginning in 2022, they decided to introduce some questions specifically having to do with Christian nationalism. And they decided to do this because it was emerging as a very loud part of the conversation that our country has been having. And so they have gone out to try to gather some data that provides some views as to what's going on, why it's going on, and who's really holding these views and what those views really constitute. So the data analyst in me wants to make sure everybody's aware that, you know, this is a survey, so there's a margin of error. It's a very large survey done very comprehensively, so it's a pretty small level of error. So at the 95th percentile, about 0.69% plus or minus. So you can really think of that in terms of if you were to redo this study 100 times, 95% of the times you'd really get similar results within that plus or minus 2/3%. So that means that it's a very well done study. Yes?
When they pick the people to answer the questions, are they necessarily people that have a religious connection of some kind? Because when you're asking about Christian nationalism, somebody who has no religious affiliation at all, we're like, well, what are you talking about? Well,
it's actually quite the opposite. They want to make sure that they're reflecting the entire society. And a large portion of the society doesn't think of themselves as religious, but they certainly do have opinions on Christian nationalism. And so I think that's part of the findings that illustrate just how that really plays out. So, but it's a good question, and we have to think about it. You know, who has a voice in deciding, you know, what's important and what's not? And the approach that Pew has taken in their studies is that they want to be as inclusive as possible across all aspects of society. So one of the first things I'd like to do is to establish a baseline of where we are as a society on a number of different measures. So one of the things that Pew does is understand religious diversity in the US. So what they've done is establish a whole series of categories that allows people to categorize themselves. And so it ranges from, and these are done in really 3 different blocks. The first block, colored blue, you'll see that there are 5 different labels up there. These are people who identify as white and what their religious views are. Those are really the people who identify as Christian, what their religious views are. Likewise, in the green shades, the olive shades, are people of color and how they identify within various Christian communities. The orange shades are those that are non-Christian. And then the pink down at the very bottom, getting to your point, is the religiously unaffiliated. And what you'll see in the pie chart is that the religiously unaffiliated are the largest group in our society. You can also see that about a third of the 40% of the people are in those bluish wedges, which break down into people who self-identify as evangelical, those who identify as mainline Protestant Christian communities, such as the ELCA, the people who identify as Catholic who are white, and then more marginal populations are the Latter-day Saints and the Orthodox communities. And then there are the Black Protestants, the Hispanic Protestant community, which we historically haven't thought a lot about Hispanics as being Protestant, but that is really a very large and dynamic community that is emerging in our society. There are other Protestants of color and other Catholics of color, and then Jehovah's Witnesses. And then as we look into the non-Christian community, we have the Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Unitarian, and other non-Christian religions, and then those who are not religiously affiliated. So this gives you a sense of how the entire population is. Now the map on the right shows the diversity by county across the entire country. So you can think of diversity as being if everybody in a county is of the same religious faith, then it has a diversity of 0. If everybody in a county has a different religious faith, it's a value of 1. So there's that scale. So when we look at Pierce County, so I picked out Pierce County on the map, and the Pierce County score is 0.89. Now that's normalized to say, well, if we have 100% of the counties, which are the most to the least diverse. So that indicates that Pierce County is a very, very diverse community. And I think our lived experience would suggest that that's the case. So when we talk about religious diversity, that has implications across a whole range of considerations that we want to be able to take into account as we start to think about the political implications of the challenges facing our society. So religious identity isn't something that's fixed. It's something that has really shifted over time. So the line chart over on the left shows the change in religious identity that's being reported by the population over a 20-year time period from 2004 or 2006 to 2024. And so what we see is all of the traditional Christian communities, the evangelicals, the non-evangelical Protestants, and the white Catholics, they've been in secular decline over the period of time. They keep on going down. It's not a function of anything else that's happening in the economy that's been able to be identified. They just keep on declining over time. We heard from our bishop a couple of weeks ago that he believes that, that's somewhat leveling off now. I don't know. I'm sure he has a lot better sources than I do, but I'm not seeing in the data, but there might be a sense of it leveling off. Now, what's happened, the countervailing pressure in the population, is the increase in that pink line, which are the religiously unaffiliated. So there's this trade-off happening in our society. Those people who identify in traditional religious communities are shrinking in size, whereas those who don't identify as such are increasing in size. So we can really see this play out in these bar charts on the left, which are taking different age cohorts and saying, well, how do you identify? So the bar chart to the far right is the 18 to 29-year-olds. And so what you see there is a very large proportion, really a plurality of that community, that age community, identifies themselves as unaffiliated. We then see the 30 to 49-year-olds, the 50 to 64-year-olds, and the 65 plus age group. So you can see at each of those levels of age segments, the amount of people who do not identify with a religious community are increasing, and really all of the other religious communities are decreasing, sometimes pretty significantly. So we can also take this population and divide it by party affiliation as a function of age. So what we see are in our colors, we have the same colors that I talked about before, the pinks being the religiously unaffiliated, the orange being non-Christians, the green being people of color who identify as Christian, the Catholics, mainline Protestants, and the evangelical Protestants from the white communities. And you can see how those slice up as we go through the age cohorts. Now, the top line are the Democrats. The bottom line are people who identify as Republicans. Yes, sir?
Did the report define evangelical?
Yes, they did. And it's really a self-reporting process. So they had two different criteria. They said, are you affiliated with a church? And if so, which church? And they have categorized those churches to some degree as to whether they fit in the evangelical bucket, the mainline Protestant bucket, or some other bucket. So those are really the two that evangelicals break across. But then they ask individuals how they think of themselves. And so it's a mixed.
So evangelical is hard for me to understand because a lot of Christians are evangelical, but it's been politicized. So here the label represents the new evangelical church in America that I'm using that as.
Yeah, I would say it's a lowercase e, evangelical, okay. So that people who make political claims, yes.
Got it.
So, for example, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America is in the mainline Protestant bucket.
But Missouri Synod is categorized elsewhere?
That's right. That is categorized as an evangelical.
So we're not treating the Lutherans like one body.
Right. Because they're not acting like one body in this particular dimension. So, and you can see that the distribution of these religious communities by party affiliation is really skewed. So Democrats are only 3% identified as white evangelicals, whereas in the Republican Party, 29%. So this gets to the issue of the bifurcation of our society along these partisan lines that hasn't traditionally played out in religious communities quite as explicitly as it's doing right now. And that is what's leading us to some of the other things we'll talk about later. So just to give you an idea, the nation is not homogeneous. So if we look at Protestant communities, the evangelical and mainline Protestant communities by county, and say, well, where are the most people who identify as evangelical? What are those counties that they live in? And then if we think of the white mainline non-evangelical Protestants, where do those people live in? So if we look at Pierce County, in both cases, the Pierce County has about 10.4% evangelicals and 12% non-evangelical mainline Protestants. So, and those are fairly close to the national average. But as we look through the map, you can see that evangelicals are really clustered in the South and the lower Midwest, whereas the mainline Protestant communities are really focused in the upper Midwest and New England, and then scattered more in the West. So keep those maps in mind, because here's the view of the religiously unaffiliated community. So what you see is that the Midwest and the South are very sparsely populated, whereas especially the West is very heavily populated by the religiously unaffiliated. Here in Pierce County, we have 27.9% who don't affiliate with a religious community, don't identify with a religious community. So that's, once again, on par with the national average. But you can see just how skewed the populations are by region. So where does this lead us? One of the things that I've certainly recognized, and having talked to several of you both today and previously, I know is felt by a lot of people, is that there's been this emergence of this idea of Christian nationalism. And a lot of people struggle, well, what is that? It is something that seems very amorphous. And what the Pew Research has tried to do is to have people characterize themselves by going through a series of questions and having people answer those questions. So I have both what I have as the question label. You'll see that repeated on other slides, but I wanted to give you the full text of the question here so that you can think about that context. So we can talk about Christian values and laws. And so the question that Pew asked was, how much do you agree or disagree with the statement, U.S. laws should be based on Christian values? The next question is about Christianity and American identity. How much do you agree or disagree with the statement, being Christian is an important part of being truly American? The third one is America as a Christian nation. How much do you agree or disagree with the statement, the U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation? The fourth one is on Christian foundations. How much do you agree or disagree with the statement, if the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore? And then finally, Christian dominion. How much do you agree or disagree with the statement, God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society? So those are the 5 questions that, after extensive research, I would really commend these studies to you, because they go through some amazing research just to develop these questions, to identify, to give people an opportunity to express their own identity in these terms. So people were asked, to identify themselves and say, yes, I strongly agree, or I kind of sort of agree, I kind of sort of disagree, and I strongly disagree. And based upon the way people answered those questions, they were able to develop a profile of the American population around this. And so here are the top level results at a national level. That there is a group of people that have been identified by Pew as Christian nationalism adherents. So those are Americans that overwhelmingly agree or completely agree with all 5 statements that we just went through. And that's about 10% of Americans. That there are Christian nationalism sympathizers, that they agree with most of the statements on the scale, but are less likely than those people who are adherents to completely agree. So that's about 20% of the American people. There are Christian nationalism skeptics, those who disagree with the statements, but are less likely than the next group, the rejectors, to completely disagree. So that's about 37%. And then the rejectors are those who completely disagree with all 5 of the statements. So you can see that breakout here. Yeah.
I'm curious, in the category of Christian nationalism skeptics, if they've identified which statements they don't agree.
I'll show you a little bit of data on that.
Okay.
But that's a very important question, because not all of these things, not everybody believes all the same things. And so it's really a question of teasing apart, where different people have different understandings.
Does it ever define Christian values?
Yeah.
I see a difference between Christian values and Christian beliefs.
I think that would be the case, but I don't believe Pew wants to impose a definition as they're asking people to identify themselves. They want people to base their self-identification on their own beliefs about what Christianity means and what Christian values are. And I think that therein lies a lot of the conundrum that we have, that we think that when we talk about Christianity, we think we're all talking about the same thing, and we're not. So here's the set of results to your question about how different populations break out on these questions. And so what you'll see is that if you look at white evangelical Protestants, Black Protestants, and Hispanic Protestants, you'll see that there's a high degree of correlation among those groups in the way that they answered these questions. Whereas mainline Protestants, white Catholics, Hispanic Catholics, likewise have a pretty high degree of correlation in how they're answering the questions as well. So what we see is that, once again, people who identify as Christian don't have comparable understandings about these various ways of characterizing Christian nationalism. And then there's the unaffiliated group, and you can see that they are very strongly oriented toward the completely disagree end of the spectrum. So once again, we have this partitioning in our society between a part of the country who feels very strongly about certain aspects of Christian nationalism, others who are much less oriented toward Christian nationalism, and then another section that is completely rejecting of those considerations. Yes?
Do they ever tease out within the Black community or the Hispanic community, because Protestant means evangelical. So within those communities, would they identify themselves as a Black evangelical as opposed to a Black mainline Protestant?
And they,
Specifically Hispanic population.
and they do. So within the Black community, there are multiple religious traditions. So you have groups like the African Methodist Episcopal. Those are much more in the mainline tradition. You have a lot of very small house church almost types of institutions that are really in the charismatic tradition. So you have this whole spectrum across that community. And that's also true in the Hispanic Catholic community, that we think of Catholicism as probably more monolithic than it really deserves, because we have, within the US especially, a wide range of traditions that are still within the Catholic umbrella. So, we do have, this partitioning, and that's why I believe these results are really interesting, because we really see that there is no homogeneous group that we can put a label on and put off in the corner and say, oh, those guys believe X or those guys believe Y. I've modified that to say, for the unaffiliated, we can put them off into one corner that says, don't even let me near that stuff. Yes?
I'm uneasy here. I'm thinking of the last 3 books I've written, in which I have argued as though I would be a leftist, extreme leftist maybe, in which I have argued that it isn't enough for Christians. So let's say you heard at the beginning of the service today the tremendous social ministries that we carry on here. And you could imagine that JT would be saying, now I want to emphasize how much Agnus Dei is doing, but what other people are doing is none of our business. So we want to take care of the poor, but it's none of our business to say the county or the state or the government should be taking care of. And so you could take this, we should exercise dominion. I could imagine that a leftist and a conservative might both say those things.
Yes.
And mean something
Totally
quite
different. Yeah.
Because I would say members of this church, maybe JT, I haven't gotten to know him well enough yet, but might say, we would like to exert such an influence on poverty issues and children's hunger issues that it's not enough for us to do it, but we want to influence the county to do it. That might sound to some other people as dominionism. So it's tricky.
So I would suggest, based upon my personal experience coming out from childhood as a member of what would now be considered a pretty right-wing evangelical community, Heidi's laughing at that because she's met my relatives and she knows what this is like, that those people would say, well, we really believe in helping the poor as well. And we want to help them by taking over the government and making sure that the government is a Christian government so that they'll help the poor people as Christians. Not, I want the government to help the poor people irrespective of their beliefs or my belief. I think that's the difference.
Just one more thing. So let's say the new pope. The new pope feels quite comfortable lecturing J.D. Vance that he is not a good Catholic. And the reason he's not a good Catholic is he doesn't hold Catholic social values. So it's very tricky.
But we don't see J.D. Vance changing his tune either. So, yes, but it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that, we're not homogeneous as a society. And we have all of this heterogeneity playing out in the religious dimension, in the political dimension, and many other ways. And that makes it very hard to coalesce around any given approach to go forward. because right now there's not agreement on that. So just to reiterate, this is one of the statements. I picked dominionism because, to my mind, it is the acid test of whether you're a Christian nationalist. That if you believe in dominionism, then you're talking about taking over society, not in a theoretical sense, but in a practical, material sense of waging war against those who don't believe what you believe. So, yes, I'm sorry.
Just one quick
Yes.
observation. On the map one, of the white evangelical Protestants, there's still 54% who disagree.
Right.
So that's surprising.
Yes.
There's hope.
You can't add all those numbers up. The folks who disagree with Dominion way outnumber the ones who agree. So how do we lose the election?
We've got,
Well, who has the bully pulpit?
yeah, it's the communication, and so when we talk about dominionism, it's not just a word. So there's an actual group called the Apostolic Reformation, and their objective is to establish dominion across what they consider the 7 mountains of society. And those include things like the government, public education, business, really all the major levers in our society. And that's what they mean by dominion.
How does this tie in with Christian nationalism, the group that you just mentioned?
Say that again?
How does that group tie in with Christian nationalism?
So my personal perspective is that I see that as the nexus of the Christian nationalism activity in our society. Yeah. I'm sorry, somebody over here had a question, yes.
Yeah, you said something about the 7 mountains.
Right.
So I haven't heard this term.
The 7 mountains?
Who's saying that? Where's that coming from?
Well, that's this group, the Apostolic Reformation, has really used that language. There's a number of books that are out on that topic. In fact, you can see it playing out. If you read Project 2025, all 900 pages of it, which I had to do for work, you can see how those threads play out across
the
Project.
major institutions of society.
Right.
Like economy and
Education, yeah, yes.
2 quick questions, I think. And you may get to this, but I'm curious what it would look like if the question was, God has called white evangelical Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of society. That, of course, that doesn't indicate anything about what I think. The other one I'm curious is there in this study anything about percentages of these different groups who actually vote?
Actually, is there any information on how folks vote on these things?
And whether or not they vote.
I'll show you some of that data.
I
Yes.
just have one observation, and I
Uh-huh.
don't know what it means, but the commonality of who skipped it, the percentage is almost the same all the way down. It shows wants to be involved no matter what it is, and
Yeah.
has an opinion.
Stepping outside of the data for a moment, my expectation is that, and you can see that as you look at in statistics, in these type of surveys results, you talk about crosstabs. Who answers different questions differently. And the people who seem to be skipping here are those who are in the mostly agree category. Mostly agree, because they don't want, they feel a social pressure not to be called out. So that's my interpretation, just looking at the crosstabs.
Except the unaffiliated. They step
Well,
forward and say too.
Yeah, well, that's why they had 2%. So if you say, well, maybe 2% across all of these categories really don't want to save, for for non-partisan reasons, then certainly all the other groups you could attribute some level of not wanting to admit what they really believe. So we can look not just at the national level, but here's a slice that looks at the metropolitan statistical area that includes Seattle, Bellevue, Tacoma, Gig Harbor, and say, well, how does our community play across these different questions? And so you can see here that compared to the national results, we're much more on the mostly to completely disagree end of the spectrum. So dramatically so, and we'll see that play out in some other results that I'll show you shortly. So one of the things that this study has tried to do is look and see if there is any change over time. So as I mentioned before, they started asking these questions back in 2022. And so they've had a number of studies that they've looked at. And what you can see here, the lines are pretty flat. That means that there's not been a lot of change in the way people characterize their beliefs. So, yeah, it's only across 3 years, yeah. And it's, you can think of these really about 9 different surveys that they did across those 3 years. But, it's the data that we have. Yeah,
the study, in an earlier slide, you pivoted from the categories to the correlation to the political party. Did these latest slides do the same thing?
I'll get you.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, that's all right. Yep. Okay, so here's one way in which we can start slicing and dicing these things. So when we talk about these different categories of adherents, sympathizers, skeptics, and rejectors, we can look across them in several dimensions. So, and I apologize, all I could do was really snip the report. I couldn't grab the text and bring it in. So my apologies there. But if we look at the top line on the chart, that talks about all Americans. So that's the baseline set of results that we've been talking about before. And then the 3 below them talk about whether those people self-identify as Republicans, Independents, or Democrats. And once again, and we saw some of these figures before for the Republicans and Democrats, but that independent line in the middle is probably the most important because that indicates where the swing voters are. So that's what we really need to understand. And you can see that as we go from Republicans through Independents through Democrats, that preponderance of the skeptics and the rejectors really increases. Likewise, we can talk about, well, where do people get their information? So we all are victims of the information ecosystem that we live in. So people who get their news primarily from far-right television news, so this would be like the One America Network, or I forget what the other one is called here. I didn't put it in the text. They're very, very weighted heavily toward adherents and sympathizers. People who mainly get their news from Fox News have more of a balance, but they are much more skewed to the adherents and sympathizers than is true for the preponderance of the population. If you don't use TV news at all, so think of the people using TikTok as their source of news.
Now, I don't use TV. I use PBS, but go ahead.
Well,
I'm teasing you, but go ahead.
I would say that that's mainstream TV, but yeah.
It's not TV.
Okay.
I do it for YouTube. Go ahead.
Well, it's the same thing, yeah. So people who don't watch the TV news, very heavily oriented toward the rejectors and the skeptics. So once again, this is also a reflection of who is in that population, and they're primarily young people. So that's who we would see, as the religiously unaffiliated, very heavily weighted toward rejectors. And then those who use mainstream TV news are once again very heavily weighted toward the rejector and the skeptic orientations. So here's another way to slice and dice it. Here we look at it by educational attainment, by age category, and by racial self-identification. So what's really striking in the educational view of things is that people with high school or less education, or with some college, are more heavily weighted toward the adherents and sympathizers. Those with four-year degrees, and especially those with postgraduate degrees, are much more heavily weighted toward the rejectors and skeptics. Likewise with the age cohorts, these are the same age cohorts we talked about previously. Those who are over 65 are much more highly reflective of the adherents and sympathizers than those who are the youngest age cohorts, which are very, very heavily weighted toward skeptics and rejectors. If we look at the black, white, multiracial, and Hispanic communities, they are remarkably consistent with one another, with the exception of the black and Hispanic communities, which tend to not be rejectors in the same sense as what we've seen before. And that gets back to this issue that you can be a person of color, deeply embedded in your religious tradition, and still feel that some of these attributes of Christian nationalism are appropriate. So we can't think of society, once again, falling along very discrete populations. They're not. And here's the breakdown by religious affiliation. So you can see, once again, we have in the top portion of the diagram, the white evangelical Protestant, the Hispanic Protestant, and the black Protestants are all clustered at the top with very similar, to my eye at least, characterizations as to how they fall along that continuum. Then we have the group of the white Catholics, the white mainline non-evangelical Protestants, the Hispanic Catholics, kind of clustering together with a more moderate distribution across those categories. And then the non-traditional, non-Christian faiths, really at the bottom of the chart, very heavily weighted away from Christian nationalism. So once again, as you would expect, given, if you're Buddhist, do you want to be in a Christian nation? Yeah. So this takes a little different slice and perhaps gets to some of the questions that were raised earlier today. So when we think about Christianity, it's not just a label, it's a set of practices that we all engage in at some level. And so they looked at three ways of understanding practices. So they asked questions about, have you prayed recently? Have you attended service recently? Those types of questions. And what we see is, once again, if you do something once a week, at least once a week, you're much more likely to think of yourself as being in a Christian nationalist mindset. And this is true across white Christians. So this is really looking at the Christian self-identifiers, white Christians, black Christians, and Hispanic Christians. The more practices you engage in, the more frequently, the higher the likelihood that you also have Christian nationalist beliefs.
Did they break this down by, if you look at white Americans, what percentage of them are evangelical Christians, what portion of them are mainstream?
I haven't seen that level of decomposition in the reports that I've got, but I'm sure they have it.
I just,
Yeah.
curious, given my experience of the attitudes about the church of evangelical, white evangelical Christians,
Yeah.
that there might be a...
Well, I think that's true, and so, once again, you know, we have available the data that they've reported, but also that you can actually go, and if you're a data geek, you can download the entire data set and slice it and dice it to your heart's content. I haven't done that.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure, the question was, could you isolate more directly the percentage of people who would identify themselves as evangelicals in terms of this breakdown across practices? And my response was that I just don't have the data at that level of decomposition because I haven't gone off to get it and play with it. So let's think about, well, what does this mean in terms of our politics? And so here's a way of looking at this. So you'll see in the map over on the right side of the screen, it shows every state. I'm sorry, my right, your left. I got to get that stage right, stage left down again because I always forget. So over there, you will see that the Washington State has 16% of the people who identify themselves as Christian nationalist adherents or sympathizers. Look down in the Mississippi River Valley, and you'll find Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma having 50% thereabouts. Let's throw in West Virginia and Wyoming into those populations too. North Dakota, so that's where these are not just, people out on the periphery. This is the majority or a very heavy plurality of states. Then on this side of the chart, you can see what the distribution of the states are by their average score on the Christian national scale. So that's the x-axis, the bottom axis. And then the percent who voted for Trump on the y-axis, one going up and down. The line drawn through the middle is just the trend line that shows how these all cluster around each other. Washington State, I've got it pointed out there at the point of that little bubble, is very low in its average score on Christian nationalism. Only Massachusetts has a lower score than Washington. And a little higher score on who voted for Trump as a function of their Christian nationalist orientation. So what that says is that more people voted for Trump than just because they're Christian nationalists. So that's the other thing that we have to keep in mind. There are lots of reasons people do things.
So I don't mean to be picking on you
Yeah.
here. I am wondering, let me just preface this by saying, I'm wondering how much of this data is a few pollsters, kind of people, and how much is it religious scholars? So let me give you an example. If you just want to define dominionism as exercising maximal control over public life and government, then Catholics are dominionism in spite of all that data. Because Catholics want to say, I want a society in which there's no abortion, no gays, no this, no trans, no this, and we'll do anything possible to be sure that those values, but they would never call that Christian nationalism. They would call it, the word just escaped me for a moment, hold on, natural law theory. So Catholic natural law theory is a form of dominionism. It claims to know what kind of values God has built into the social order, and it's now our responsibility to make sure those get reflected legislatively. They never call it Christian nationalism, but the way you've been describing it, it sounds remarkably like that. And one more thing. About 30 years ago, a Missouri Synod Lutheran pastor named Richard John Newhouse converted to Catholicism and became an extremely influential. He founded a magazine called First Things, which is still going gangbusters. I subscribe to it just as a kind of hair shirt. But the Newhouse's great pitch was that the church must re-enter the public square. That was his thing. And in some ways, he was thinking of European Catholicism, where we know what it means to say there's a Catholic culture going on in Italy or wherever. And he thought that's what we need to do in the United States. Dominionism is actually a Calvinist word, so he didn't call it dominionism, but talk about pushing to get the government to reflect Catholic values, even though he didn't call it dominionism.
So I agree with your observations completely, and I'll tell you a little personal story. My great-grandfather wrote a book called Catholicism Against Itself at the turn of the 20th century, so about 1900. And that was about what he saw as the impingement of Catholicism on the natural right of Protestants to rule the U.S. And so I completely agree with you that, you know, first of all, these ideas aren't new. And secondly, the way that they're labeled in this particular context, you know, yeah, there are ways to do it otherwise that you might have gotten different results. But once of these things are about people, how people say that they believe, not how we want to put a stricture around them to categorize them.
Not to be too cute about it, but what your grandfather was saying was Catholic dominionism is picking on Protestant dominionism.
Exactly.
But we all know that Protestant dominionism
is the right one.
Supposed to be.
Exactly. That's exactly what the case was. So, okay, so this is voting for Trump. So you can think of this as really the entry point into this larger discussion about how this is starting to affect our society. So here's another view of it. This says, what is the relationship between Christian nationalism and believing in the QAnon conspiracy concepts that have been extant for, 10 years in our society? And what this suggests is that it is very highly correlated. We know correlation is not causation, but they are highly correlated with one another. That means that your propensity to believe in Christian nationalism is very highly related to your propensity to believe QAnon-based conspiracy theory. Joanne?
Can you give me one paragraph description of the QAnon? I've been flooded with too much information these last months.
Yeah, so QAnon is this idea that really took off in the first Trump administration that there was a cabal of Satanists running the US and the world, and drinking the blood of children, which, if you were familiar with anti-Semitism in the late 19th century, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion reads like the manual for the QAnon conspiracy. So that is really the nut of that issue, and it has played out in many different dimensions. It's gone quiet over the last few years because the guys who were running it got tired, or they made enough money and decided to do something else. So it has not played the same role recently.
And also, I have 3 adult children, all college educated and all very conservative, so I walk around on tiptoes a hell of a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I have heard this from my children, and it went dovetail with the trans thing, and with the, trans guys reading stories and let's have the children put money in their G-strings. It was all tied together. Now that's gotten a lot quieter because we've got the Epstein thing, and it's like, how do you, along with that cabal, here's, it's too close for comfort, so now they're on something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all I can do.
So if we look at the bar charts over here, what this does is take these 4 categories of Christian nationalists: the adherents, the separatists, or the sympathizers, the skeptics, and the rejectors, and say, how do those folks align with QAnon? So the orange part of the bars are QAnon believers, the QAnon doubters are green, and the QAnon rejectors are in blue. So, and you can see this correlation once again between the adherents in Christian nationalism are very strongly characterized by their QAnon beliefs. The rejectors, in comparison, are completely rejecting of both theories. So you can see, once again, a lot of correlation between this. Washington has the distinction of being, once again, the second lowest in terms of its QAnon adherence score. So only Massachusetts, once again. The Massachusetts guys are really giving us a run for the money. Yeah.
Yeah, we're the lowest.
I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong scale. You're right. 13% in Massachusetts, 10% in Washington. But you can see once again that at the top of the scale, we've got West Virginia, Louisiana, Kentucky. That's really where a lot of the energy around QAnon plays out. And that's, once again, the same places that we see a lot of energy around Christian nationalism. So I've saved the most, what I find to be disturbing last, and that is the relationship of Christian nationalism and political violence. I'll note that last night, Harvard Medical School was bombed. No more information than that. So here we see, once again, this range of the states that say, well, Washington, is really not interested in political violence. Yes.
I'm pretty proud of Washington on these last 2 measures, but I've got one question before we finish up. Do people know that Christopher Rufo was one of the big radical right? Lives in New Harvard. What's the name of the Christopher Rufo? He's a big, far right guy. And I don't know what he's doing in Harvard. Other people know about him?
Interesting, Massachusetts is
That's
down,
violence.
down
It's almost like
on the left
Tarzan.
again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
We've got to get to him
Yeah.
and take him out. Just
So
kidding, just kidding.
this is being recorded. So, and then once again, we can see the support for violence, and they define this violence as because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may need to resort to violence in order to save our country. It is. So once again, we see this correlation with adherence to Christian nationality being heavily weighted toward either completely agreeing with that statement or mostly agreeing with that statement. Sympathizers, much less so in completely agreeing, but strongly in mostly agreeing. And then skeptics and rejectors not believing that. So I guess, if you're on the right side of the spectrum, you'd say, oh, well, there must be 3% of Antifa up there, that believe in political violence even though they reject Christian nationalism. So that's the logic that's used.
It's interesting to look at and think about where the National Guard is being sent into.
Right. Where they come from, where the National Guard units coming from that are being sent into what states. Yeah. Okay, so it's,
One other current,
Yes.
just happened 2 weeks ago. So the American bishops, except those appointed by, well, the present Pope, that would be very few, or by Pope Francis, but the ones who've been around for a long time, they sound a little bit more like Christian nationalism. And the Bishop of New York called Charlie Kirk's a modern St. Paul, and the Pope responded by evicting him from his bishopric. So you have the battle going on within Catholicism.
very much so.
So he's no longer the Bishop of New York, or he's about to be.
Yeah. And so we see a number of denominations that are really breaking across these fault lines. So you can think of what's happening in the Episcopal Church, where there is an Anglican community who is not Anglican in the sense of the UK's Anglican Church, but in the sense of the African Anglican Church, who adopts a lot of the same anti-LGBT women leadership types of statuses that community is wanting to express. So you see it in Methodism, you see it in Presbyterianism, so you see it in Lutheranism as well. So that's true across all of these dimensions, all of these different faith groups. So one last slide that is just put in here to lift the mood after the previous discussion. This is a map that I found that shows the presidential election results in 2024 by precinct for Pierce County. And so once again, I think this is important to understand that, different communities have very different understandings as to what constitutes the majority opinion around here. So you can see the county as a whole over here in the right map, and then on the left, I zoomed in on the peninsula so that hopefully you can see where you live and what your precinct looks like. Yeah, so let's see if this works. Yep. So Heidi and I live here in this really dark blue segment tracked between a bunch of Trump precincts. So, you can think about where it is that you live and how your views conform with those of your neighbors and then the larger community.
This text is small, and for some of us that are old, the dark blue is...
So the darker the blue, the more people voted for Harris. So 90% are the really dark blue that you would see out here. The really dark red, like here, 90% voted for Trump.
And so the top of the blue
gradation
is what percentage?
Top of the blue is Harris at less than 50%, but it was still a plurality, so they still won that precinct.
Great, thank you.
Yep. And then there are some that were tied, a few of them. It's always interesting to find. And then these gray areas, like this is Mount Rainier National Park, where there aren't any voters living. And this is Lewis McCord here, where if you can barely make it out, it says results hidden. And that's something that the federal government requires for all results for military bases, because they don't want to have a sense of political skew among military folks.
Can you repeat that? I didn't hear.
Sure. In this large gray area over here, this is Mount Rainier National Park, where there aren't people.
You said something about military.
Right, so this is Joint Base Lewis McCord here, and that's in gray as well, and it says here that results are hidden. And they're hidden because the national government has directed election officials not to disclose the voting patterns of soldiers who are resident on the bases. So we can see soldiers who are living out in the community, what their votes are just as well as anybody else's. But if you're living on board in a base, your results aren't available. So what's interesting about this is that the orange color that would indicate Trump voters seems to have a big area here. And it says here, land doesn't vote, people do. And so, 60% of the county, well, it says here, 53% voted for Harris and 42% voted for Trump.
Less populated areas.
Yeah. So once again, you can think, if you've driven through these areas and driven out to Paradise, you don't see very many houses, and that's why you have one precinct that is 10% of the county, 15% of the county. So, yes.
Can I just put in a pitch for how important our local school board election is? Yes. And if you let me finish your ear, I can. Phyllis, can you stand up and face us? I said, I want to put a pitch in for how important our local school board election is. And I'm not going to make any comment, but I would be glad to comment.
So my original proposal for this discussion was to be focusing on education, but given the timing just before the election, I decided not to do that for the reasons that you're alluding to. Other questions, comments?
You did a great job.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So when we do a follow-up, because we're about to do a thingy, and we're about to see a response potentially to the current administration, will you do a follow-up in 6 months? Just curious.
It depends on what type of data is available.
It's every 6 months, you said.
Well, it's every 6 months, but they don't necessarily publish the results. They gather the data, but they don't publish the results.
You have to go and do it yourself.
Yeah.
Steve, is it possible to get a copy of your slides, or would you share them?
Yeah, do you want to just email me or give me that PDF?
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, so. Well, thanks.
Yep.
So
Frank with the ballot, just a couple questions. I directed a lot of nations. This was, do they randomize every 6 months then?